Recently, Mingde Hospital suddenly became the focus of national media due to a remarkable event. 17 long-term bedridden patients miraculously began walking within a few days. This group included patients with conditions ranging from total paralysis and vegetative states to severe spinal injuries. However, a new concern emerged shortly after their recovery. These patients, while mobile and seemingly healthy, exhibited unusual symptoms like aversion to light, preference for darkness and humidity, and a marked reluctance to interact with others. The hospital's experts suggested that these were side effects of their prolonged bedridden state, emphasizing the need for a comprehensive rehabilitation program, along with psychological treatment, for their true reintegration into society. This development should have been a cause for celebration, but there was one person who couldn't find joy in the news. That person was Mingde, the night watchman at the hospital's mortuary. Despite his grave concerns, he had hesitated to report that recently, there had been strange occurrences with the bodies in the mortuary. Sequentially, corpses began showing wounds on the back of their necks, as if their spines had been punctured and their marrow drained. The bite marks suggested a non-human perpetrator, given the two small punctures that could easily go unnoticed with a bit of concealing. Interestingly, it was Mingde who stumbled upon this grim discovery, albeit accidentally. Human nature is peculiar in that the unknown or unseen can be consumed without a second thought, but once the truth is unveiled, the gates of fear swing wide open, unleashing uncontrollable dread. Given his job requirements, which include acting as a corpse handler, one would expect Mingde to possess considerable bravery, especially with the understanding that the bodies are inanimate. But it seems fear has a unique way of asserting itself, especially when confronted with the inexplicable. Fear in humans is actually derived from the unknown. It's the uncertainty that generates fear. If one were to know what they are facing, it's simply a matter of closing their eyes and bracing for impact. That's why characters in horror films are initially scared and fearful. It's because they don't know what they're about to face or how they might die. But when they finally confront death, they often find a sense of calm. It's like waiting for an outcome. The pain isn't in whether the news is good or bad, but rather, in not knowing. Between hope and despair, fear erodes will and frays time. And so, fear is the process of waiting. Mingde, usually a fearless man, is starting to feel afraid. He can't help but wonder what might be causing these wounds on the corpses. Despite his efforts and close attention to every slight sound in the nights that follow, he comes up empty. Fresh bodies continue to turn up with their spinal fluid drained. It's as if the culprit is invisible, or perhaps some kind of insect. But Mingde dismisses each theory in turn. An invisible person couldn't open the morgue's freezer drawers without making noise, and how could an insect, large enough to drain spinal fluid, penetrate the tightly sealed drawers? This week, during his day shifts, Mingde notices that the body mutilations seem to occur only at night. Should he warn his night shift replacement Zhang Dashan? But would such knowledge frighten him? Mingde hesitates. Suddenly, Mingde realizes a grave issue. Although there is a steady influx of bodies, they are getting damaged at a rate that suggests they'll soon have none left undisturbed. What if the mysterious creature developed a taste for the living and started draining the spinal fluid from the living as well? The thought terrifies him. He makes a decision to at least uncover what is behind these events, to warn others. Write this narrative in English, preserving the basic meaning while changing the language. Trading 2 bottles of liquor and a packet of cigarettes, Mingde managed to get the security tapes for the duration of his shift from the guard Lu. Strange as it seemed, there was a consistent pattern each night where a segment of the video would be shrouded in darkness for around 10 to 20 minutes. Before the screen would go black, Mingde could clearly see himself on camera, wide awake. However, he couldn't for the life of him recall anything out of the ordinary happening during those times. After reviewing the footage several times, it was Lu who pointed out the anomaly. Mingde's position did not change at all before or after the blackout. On several tapes, this was the case. It didn't make sense. Was it possible that he stood, staring blankly for 20 minutes straight every night at exactly the same time? Lu suggested that they should check the cameras for any malfunctions, but Mingde asked him to hold off on doing so in case it raised alarm with whoever might be involved. The next afternoon, to Mingde's surprise, Lu arrived with some technicians for a routine inspection of the mortuary's cameras. They optimized the angles, nearly eliminating the blind spots. During the maintenance, Lu discovered that someone had stuck chewing gum at the base of the camera which monitored the entrance. This had limited a camera that could rotate 90 degrees to only 60, creating a 30-degree blind spot right where the door stood. Mingde was both pleased and concerned, pleased to have identified a potential clue, but also worried that these actions might alert the person responsible, making future crimes even more covert. When leaving work, Mingde saw Lu wasn't in his usual post at the security booth. Wondering if Lu was off duty, Mingde considered approaching him to say hello but saw him chatting and laughing with someone on his way across the street. The person beside him looked familiar, a doctor from the hospital, though Mingde couldn't recall from which department. Deciding it might be intrusive to interrupt, Mingde focused on his own path instead. Write this article in English, maintaining the basic meaning while changing the language. Mingde had only taken a few steps when a piercing screech of brakes tore through the air, followed by a chorus of screams. Turning back, he witnessed a horrifying scene, an accident, which claimed the life of security guard Lu in an instant, half his body crushed beneath the rear wheel of a cement mixer. Even though his job involved handling the deceased daily, this live fatality sent shivers down Mingde's spine. Upon inquiring, he discovered that everyone had been waiting at the red light when, suddenly, Lu dashed into the middle of the road as if waiting for the vehicle to arrive. After piecing together the events, Mingde's gut told him there was more to the incident than what appeared on the surface. It was then he recalled the doctor who had been standing alongside Lu before the accident, a figure who had vanished without a trace. Driven by professional habit, Mingde approached the body and in a shocking turn, spotted something he shouldn't have, a 3-inch long, slender centipede crawling out of Lu's ear before quickly disappearing from sight. Recollecting the earlier conversation between Lu and the man, Mingde remembered it was mostly the stranger speaking, with Lu merely nodding or laughing without many gestures. And that's when he remembered, the stranger had leaned close to whisper something into Lu's ear. Though the content was unknown, the action now seemed suspicious. Could it be that he had transferred a long centipede into Lu's ear? Mingde thought he might be going mad. After Lu's body was taken to the morgue, Mingde went out of his way to examine the corpse, only to find it smashed beyond recognition, with yellow fat and dark viscera mingled in a macabre mix. On a whim, he checked Lu's neck but found nothing, laughing at his paranoia. The next day, carrying offerings for Lu, Mingde couldn't shake the feeling that leaving Lu with the task of checking the cameras had indirectly led to his unusual death. While paying his respects and uncovering the corpse's face, he noticed Lu's head was askew. Straightening it, an insight struck him, and he tilted the head to inspect the neck again, this time noticing bite marks. For several days, Mingde was haunted with anxiety, too afraid and confused to act. Could the hospital be conducting experimental treatments, quietly harvesting spinal fluid from the corpses? And could these 17 patients be their test subjects? The mounting questions dragged him down. For half a month, Mingde stopped worrying about the condition of the bodies. As long as it wasn't something as dire as vampires draining blood, it was fine. At least the living were safe, for now. But sometimes trouble finds you when you least expect it. On a day when Mingde was assigned the day shift, he returned home, only to realize he had left his keys in the office. So, he headed back to retrieve them. The office was empty, Jean Dachshund probably inside the morgue. Mingde was about to collect his keys and leave when he heard rustling noises from the morgue. It sounded like a new body was being delivered, but there was no voice accompanying the noise. Peering through the plastic curtains of the morgue, he saw shadowy figures moving inside. Hearing footsteps approaching down the hallway, he quickly hid himself in a large storage cabinet in the office. Reflecting on it later, he realized that hiding probably saved his life. Time passed within the cabinet, marked by the periodic sounds of people passing by, followed by a strange hissing sound like a gas leak. Footsteps faded away, and after a while, someone entered the office. Carefully opening a slit in the cabinet, Mingde saw Zhang Dashan walk in. Mingde emerged, startling Zhang with a cry of surprise. After explaining he had come back for his keys, Mingde probed about Zhang's whereabouts, barely hiding his suspicions. Zhang, still recovering from the shock, laughed it off, saying it was silly for someone in their line of work to be scared and that he had just made a quick round inside the morgue. After Zhang reassured him that he was alone, Mingde couldn't help but recall those 20 minutes of inexplicable stillness on the security tapes. Could it be hypnosis? The next day, Mingde didn't go home after his shift. Instead, he circled around quietly back to the morgue. Zhang, bored in the office, was reading a magazine. Everything seemed normal. Mingde had already scouted the layout during the day, finding a table with a broken wheel tucked away and unused. He affixed a prepared wireless camera under this table, well disguised and unnoticeable. To ensure no signal interference, he hid in a cleaning closet beside the morgue, surrounded by mops and assorted cleaning supplies, tolerating the odor he had grown accustomed to. To stay awake, he turned his earphones to full volume, so any sound in the morgue would come through the camera's microphone. Enduring the humid, putrid closet, every minute felt like an hour. Barely halfway through a bottle of water, he had already had to relieve himself several times. Thankfully, there was a sink. Finally, at 2 a.m., after fluctuating between sleep and wakefulness without any sign of activity, Mingde was starting to regret his decision. He could have just looked the other way. But just as he was beginning to feel remorse, footsteps came through his earphones. Checking the video, it was Zhang making his routine check inside the morgue. Then, a white figure appeared outside the morgue door. Moving silently, even the sensitive microphone failed to pick up any sound. The plastic curtain was gently lifted, revealing a familiar face. It was Zhao Yunlong, the doctor who had recently been praised by the hospital's dean. Zhao's complexion was deathly pale, except for his abnormally bright lips and white teeth. Slowly, he opened his mouth to reveal what looked like a tongue, but upon closer inspection, Mingde realized that it wasn't a tongue at all, but an abnormally large, fat caterpillar, one that resembled a brown hexapod. It sprayed a green mist into the air like a sprayer, the substance hanging ominously in the enclosed space. Li Mingde watched as Zhang Dashan suddenly froze, immobilized. Zhao Yunlong retracted his grotesque tongue and then spat out several black centipedes from his mouth. The centipedes, almost sentient in their movement, writhed and made their way up the wall. They climbed directly onto the morgue's cameras, entwining their bodies tightly around the lenses. At that moment, Mingde understood why there were blackouts in the surveillance footage and why he himself had stood motionless under the camera for 20 minutes. Having set everything in motion, Yunlong confidently stepped further into the morgue. He pulled out the mortuary logbook and opened the refrigerated drawer containing new bodies, cursing the dwindling supply. Then he extended his tongue toward the door, not the hexapod from before, but a pair of centipede antennae that vibrated at high frequency in the air. Promptly, the group of 17 recovered spinal patients walked in. Mingde then remembered that these patients were not under the care of a single doctor, but their recovery coincided with Dr. Zhao Yunlong's arrival at the hospital. Something was definitely amiss. The patients split into groups around the bodies. They appeared to bite the corpses at the back of the neck and then each inserted a proboscis, sucking the marrow out of the spine. Mingde watched in horror, grateful that their interest was only in the deceased. What would happen if they turned their attention to the living? With no fresh bodies that day, the monstrous creatures quickly finished their business. Comrade Li Mingde, I'm terribly sorry for the dreadful events you've experienced due to the hospital's oversight, the dean said warmly to the young man, offering a compensation of 20,000 yuan for the distress caused. The offer of continued employment was also on the table, much to Mingde's surprised gratitude. Willingly, of course. Mingde replied, rubbing his hands with enthusiasm. As the dean rose and turned his back, Mingde prepared himself for a discussion on discretion about the event. However, what happened next drained the color from his face. The dean's hair moved oddly and then fell away. It was a wig. A momentary impulse to laugh was quickly stifled by what came next. Mingde saw a massive slug on the back of the dean's head, transforming into a woman's face. "The other thing is, you killed my husband. The 20,000 yuan will buy your coffin." At that, the dean spun his head 180 degrees, spewing out a slug that rapidly covered Mingde's face. In an instant, the slug split into dozens of smaller slugs, burrowing into Mingde through his eyes, nose, mouth, and ears. He heard the sound of his brain being consumed. Crunch, crunch.